The alarm did not ring. There was no chime of electronics, no synthetic chirp to usher in the dawn, only the heavy, bruised weight of absolute silence. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning in a room that is not yours. The air smells faintly of unfamiliar plaster, stale dust, and the damp chill of a transition that happened while consciousness was suspended. You reach instinctively for the bedside table, fingers brushing across smooth wood in search of the glowing pane of glass that anchors modern existence. Your phone is there. You lift it, swipe the screen, and wait for the familiar constellation of notifications, banking apps, and digital validation to populate. Instead, the display blinks open to a single, unyielding line of text: balance, $0. There is no safety net. No hidden savings account tucked away in a digital credit union, no emergency stash of cash taped beneath a drawer, no generous relative waiting in the wings, and no external proof of your worth left anywhere on earth. The screen is flat, cold, and entirely blank. To the untrained eye, to the frantic architecture of modern civilization, this moment is christened as a tragedy. It is labeled as the end. It is the sudden, terrifying freefall of a high-wire artist who looks down to find the net has been quietly dismantled in the night. A sharp, icy spike of adrenaline floods the bloodstream, tightening the throat and constricting the chest. The mind races wildly toward panic, scouring the mental landscape for someone to blame, some past mistake to curse, or some desperate hustle to deploy before the world notices that the emperor has no clothes. Most people would call this a catastrophe. They would stay up late into the night, rubbing raw eyes in the blue glow of a monitor, wondering which bridge they burned, which lucky break eluded them, or which market shift destroyed their livelihood. But pause. Inhale the cold air of this unfamiliar room. Hear this truth, and hear it not merely with the casual faculty of your ears, but with the deep resonant chambers of your soul. If you woke up tomorrow with absolutely nothing, you would finally be standing on holy ground. There would be a moment of animal panic that is entirely human, an evolutionary echo of the survival instinct. But a sovereign consciousness does not stay there. It does not rush blindly to update a resume or beg for crumbs from a system that feeds on anxiety. Instead, it recognizes that, for the first time in an entire lifetime, the blinding smoke of the material world has cleared. The props have been kicked away. The illusions of safety built on paper currency, status symbols, and external validation have vanished in a single stroke. And there, standing amidst the ruins of what used to be a life, the observer realizes an astonishing paradox. By losing every external metric of worth, they have finally arrived at the Holy of Holies. They are standing in the pristine, unblemished silence, where the shadows of the material realm can no longer distract them from the eternal, unshakable light of spiritual law. The zero on the screen is not a tombstone, it is a blank page waiting for the pen of a creator. To understand why humanity reacts to financial loss with such catastrophic terror, one must deconstruct the invisible machinery of modern lack. Why are people broke? Conventional economic theory points to inflation, systemic inequality, wage stagnation, or poor budgeting. But these are merely the surface symptoms of a deeper, more profound metaphysical disease. Most people who are broke are not broke because they lack currency. They are broke because they are living under a self-imposed, invisible verdict of lack. They are trapped within a belief system so pervasive, so deeply woven into the cultural fabric, that it acts as an invisible glass ceiling over their entire existence. They carry a word of poverty, an unspoken, humming frequency of scarcity that builds an impassable spiritual barrier keeping their divine supply permanently at bay. Why does the human mind cling so desperately to the illusion of external security? Recursive question: why does the psychological apparatus equate a bank balance with human worth? Answer: because from infancy, civilization trains the individual to derive identity from effect rather than cause. Society acts as a vast mirror that reflects back only what is tangible, measurable, and transactional. When the mirror reflects zero, the untrained mind concludes that it is zero. It mistakes the shadow for the substance. How does this psychological trap manifest in daily behavior? Recursive question. How does an internal belief translate into an external economic desert? Answer. Through the subtle, continuous emission of defensive energy. A person living under the verdict of lack does not interact with the world as a creator, they interact as a beggar at the gates of a hostile fortress. Every action is driven by fear. Fear of not having enough, fear of being found out, fear of tomorrow. This state of constant psychological defense creates a tight, constricted vibration. In the economy of consciousness, contraction repels flow, just as fear closes the fist. To break this cycle, one must employ the mechanics of spiritual alchemy. This is not about hustle tips, morning routines, or productivity hacks designed to squeeze a few more drops of sweat from an exhausted body. Those are tools of the slave quarters. Spiritual alchemy is the art of shifting dimensions, moving the locus of control from the shifting sands of effect to the unmovable rock of cause. When an individual views wealth as something that must be hunted, cornered, and wrestled from a scarce universe, they enter into a perpetual state of spiritual warfare. They fight for scraps, but when they realize that the material world is merely a shadow play, a delayed projection of internal convictions, the entire paradigm flips. The zero balance ceases to be a master and becomes a servant. It becomes undeniable proof that the old film running through the projector of the mind has finally burned out, leaving a pure, white screen ready for a magnificent new feature. Consider the chronicle of Julian Vance, a man who, at the age of 42, possessed every outward sign of financial aristocracy. His name was featured in business journals, his bespoke suits hung in a walk-in cedar closet. His investment portfolios gleamed with multi-figure sums that afforded him the arrogant luxury of believing he was immune to the tides of fate. Julian lived behind iron gates, drank vintage wines, and measured his morning coffee against the steady, upward tick of the stock market ticker. Then came the year of the Great Fracture. Through a catastrophic cascade of global market shifts, regulatory overhauls, and a trusted partner's betrayal, Julian's empire dissolved in less than 72 hours. The digital accounts were frozen, then wiped. The courts stepped in. The home with its sweeping marble staircases was seized by creditors. By Friday evening, Julian found himself standing on a public sidewalk in the pouring rain, holding a single cardboard box containing a handful of personal mementos. His phone buzzed relentlessly with demands from lawyers, collection agencies, and former associates who suddenly treated him like a contagious ghost. For 3 weeks, Julian lived in the basement apartment of an acquaintance, trapped in the classic purgatory of the fallen rich. He spent 18 hours a day pacing the linoleum floor, dialing numbers of people who no longer took his calls, updating a resume that felt like a mockery of his former life, and cursing the universe for its cruelty. He was drowning in the sheer weight of his own resistance. His chest felt permanently gripped by an iron vice. His sleep was a feverish succession of nightmares involving audit notices and public humiliation. He was a man fighting the waves, screaming at a hurricane with his bare fists. On the 22nd day, driven to the absolute brink of physical and mental exhaustion, Julian experienced a total system collapse. He could no longer sustain the rage. He sat down on the edge of the narrow cot, looked at his empty hands, and stopped fighting. In that quiet moment of total surrender, something shifted behind his eyes. He realized that the man who had owned the mansion and the multi-figure accounts had been a phantom, a fragile costume worn by a frightened ego. The money was gone, yes, but Julian was still breathing. The rain was still falling, but it no longer felt like acid. It felt cool, clean, and indifferent to human drama. He walked over to the small window, looked out at the city lights blurring through the rain, and whispered a radical sentence into the quiet room. I thank the divine that my true supply is not tied to any bank, and that this blank slate is the beginning of my freedom. It wasn't a positive affirmation born of cheerful optimism. It was the cold, sober realization of a prisoner walking out of a collapsing cell. Julian stopped updating his resume. He stopped defending his lost past. He spent the next 7 days in a profound, unbroken internal stillness, refusing to utter a single word of complaint or scarcity. Within a month, unburdened by the frantic desperation that had previously poisoned his aura, Julian's mind cleared. He didn't return to the cutthroat corporate arena. Instead, drawing upon a dormant passion for structural design that he had abandoned 20 years prior, he sketched a revolutionary blueprint for sustainable urban housing on the back of a paper napkin. A chance encounter with an old acquaintance who saw not a desperate failure, but a calm, centered visionary led to an immediate partnership. Within 2 years, Julian had built something far more authentic, enduring, and spiritually aligned than his previous empire. The zero balance had not destroyed him, it had stripped away the false self to reveal the sovereign creator underneath. The story of Julian Vance, much like the revelation of the empty bank account, points to a singular, inescapable truth. You cannot build a magnificent house on a foundation cluttered with the debris of an old, collapsing structure. The slate must be wiped clean before the master builder can draw the new design. How does one embody this truth today, in the very hour of reading these words? Take a blank sheet of paper and a pen. At the top of the page, write down the exact financial figure or life situation that currently causes you the deepest visceral anxiety. Look at that number, whether it is thousands in debt or a chilling zero, and instead of shrinking from it, draw a thick, deliberate circle around it. Now, right beneath it. This is not my sentence, this is my canvas. Acknowledge that the anxiety you feel is merely the ego mourning the loss of a familiar illusion. Breathe into the space behind the fear. Realize that your identity is completely independent of the numbers fluctuating on an external screen. By anchoring this realization in your physical reality, you begin to step out from under the old law of lack. You stop bleeding your life force into the phantom shadows of the material world and begin turning your attention toward the engine room of your own consciousness. The slate is clear. The noise of the world is beginning to recede, but cleaning the slate is only the preparation. To truly command the elements of your reality, you must understand how the human voice acts as an unintended sorcery, casting spells of limitation into the ethers every single day. How do ordinary words become invisible chains? And more importantly, how do you silence the discordant record of the past before it plays another tragic symphony? Step forward, reader, and cross the threshold into the second pillar of your reclamation, where we examine the dangerous magic of the spoken word. The room is dark, save for the pale, ghostly luminescence emanating from an empty computer screen and the harsh, linear shadows cast by a street lamp through Venetian blinds. Imagine standing before this blank expanse. There are no cascading columns of numbers, no comforting green arrows pointing upward, no safety buffer of accumulated capital to cushion the fall. There is only the zero, a clean, unblemished void hanging in the center of the glass like a portal to nowhere. Most mortals stare at this emptiness with a sense of suffocating dread. They see a void and tremble, believing it to be a black hole intent on consuming their existence, their dignity, and their future. They press their palms against the glass, weeping over the phantom tragedies playing out in their minds, desperate to alter the terrifying digits flashing before them. But the master of reality does not look at the screen. The master steps back, turns around, and gazes into the dark theater of the mind. For what is the material world, if not a magnificent, delayed shadow play? When the images projected upon the silver screen of life are twisted, dark, and filled with the monsters of scarcity, the amateur rushes forward. They claw at the silver screen, tearing at the fabric, weeping over the illusions, trying with bloody fingers to physically move the painted characters. They do not understand the fundamental mechanics of cinema. They do not realize that the figures dancing on the wall possess no independent power, no volition, and no substance of their own. To change the projection, one never touches the screen. One walks past the rows of empty velvet seats, opens the heavy oak door to the projection booth, and examines the mechanism itself. Standing before the blank canvas of an empty bank account, the sovereign soul smiles. They recognize that this terrifying zero is not a verdict of doom, it is the formless, pristine void that preceded the original command, "Let there be light." It is the blank slate upon which the cosmos is waiting to paint a brand new masterpiece. The shadows cannot fix themselves. The numbers on the screen cannot rearrange their own sequence. Before a single coin shifts in the tangible world, There must be a seismic, uncompromising shift in the vibration burning deep within the human heart. To grasp why human beings remain imprisoned by their external circumstances, one must deconstruct the ancient metaphysical architecture governing cause and effect. Why does humanity continually wage war against the effects of life while ignoring the invisible cause? Why does the psychological apparatus instinctively default to fighting the material manifestation rather than mastering the internal frequency? Answer: because the human nervous system evolved through millennia of physical survival to respond exclusively to tangible threats. A predator in the brush, a drought in the valley, or an empty granary demanded immediate physical exertion: running, fighting, hoarding. Consequently, when modern civilization presents an abstract threat like a bank balance of zero, the primitive brain misinterprets it as a physical beast at the door. It triggers a cascade of survival hormones, locking the individual into a state of reactive combat where they attempt to solve a spiritual malady with brute force physical labor. How does this misdirected combat perpetuate the very cycle of poverty it seeks to escape? Answer: by operating under the fundamental illusion that life is a battleground rather than a playground. Florence Scovel Shinn illuminated this eternal truth. Life is a game of boomerangs. Whatever an individual projects outward in thought, word, and deep-seated conviction eventually loops through the invisible ethers and returns to its originator with terrifying mathematical accuracy. When a person looks at an empty bank account and shrieks, "I am ruined," they are not merely venting frustration, they are issuing a binding spiritual decree. They are throwing a heavy, jagged boomerang into the cosmos. The universe, acting as a faithful, uncritical mirror, simply catches that boomerang and hurls it back, materializing precisely what was decreed. To shift this paradigm, one must master the mechanics of spiritual optics. The material world is governed by immutable laws of projection. The heart is the projector. The subconscious mind is the film reel. The spoken word is the lens. And the physical circumstances of life, money, relationships, health are the images cast upon the wall. Most conventional advice screams at the waves. It tells the drowning sailor to paddle harder, bail faster, and curse the storm. But you cannot change the course of an ocean liner by shouting at the swells. You must descend into the engine room. You must adjust the internal engine of belief, recalibrate the emotional frequency, and change the film spinning through the projector. When the internal vibration shifts from frantic desperation to sovereign calm, the external shadows have no choice but to reconfigure themselves in divine alignment. Consider the historical precedent of Master Elias, an architect and master optician in Renaissance Florence who spent decades crafting magnificent lenses for astronomers and cathedral rose windows. Elias was renowned throughout the province for his ability to grind glass so flawlessly that it seemed to capture and refract the pure light of the heavens. Yet, despite his genius, Elias fell prey to a devastating economic collapse when a rival guild weaponized political influence, freezing his assets, seizing his workshop, and leaving him in his old age with nothing but a drafty, unheated garret and an empty iron strongbox. For months, Elias behaved like every other victim of circumstance. He sat in the freezing gloom of his garret, staring at the empty strongbox, cursing the corrupt magistrates, and weeping over the loss of his life's work. Every time he looked at the iron box, his heart contracted and his hands trembled. He tried to grind new lenses using broken shards of scrap glass, but his hands shook so violently that every piece shattered. He was fighting the shadows on the wall. He was screaming at the waves. One bitter winter evening, as he sat shivering in the dark, a traveling scholar, an old mystic known simply as Master Aaron, knocked on his door and entered uninvited. Aaron looked at the trembling old optician, then at the empty iron box, and smiled gently. "Elias," the mystic whispered, pulling up a wooden stool, "why do you weep over the shadow when the sun has already set behind you?" "I weep because I am stripped of everything," Elias groaned, his voice cracking with bitterness. "My workshop is gone. My gold is stolen. I am a beggar in my own city." "You are a master of optics," Aaron replied softly, tapping Elias gently on the forehead. "And yet you do not understand the lens through which you view your own soul. You stare into an empty iron box and call it a tomb. But what is a lens, Elias? A lens is nothing until light passes through it. Your strongbox is not empty. It is a clean, polished pane of glass, waiting for a new image to be cast upon it. Stop fighting the magistrates. Stop cursing the cold. Go to the projector of your heart and change the film. Elias sat in silence for a long time after the mystic left. The words echoed through the hollow chambers of his mind. Slowly, deliberately, the old optician closed his eyes. He stopped visualizing the lost workshop, the seized gold, and the betrayal of the magistrates. Instead, he reached deep into his memory, recalling the brilliant, blinding flash of sunlight passing through a cathedral rose window at high noon. He held that image in his mind until his chest stopped tightening. He imagined his life not as a ruin, but as a vast, unwritten blueprint. The next morning, Elias did not rush to the magistrate's court. He did not beg for his old job. Instead, he took a pristine sheet of parchment, picked up his finest pen, and drew a radical new design for a portable astronomical telescope, a device the world had never seen, combining precision optics with compact military utility. He spoke no words of lack. He moved with the quiet, unshakable dignity of a sovereign creator. Within 6 months, a visiting merchant delegation caught sight of Elias's new design, recognized its genius, and funded his workshop tenfold. Elias did not merely recover his wealth, he surpassed it, because he had learned the supreme secret: the external world is only ever an echo of the internal projector. The Chronicle of Master Elias and the Immutable Law of the Projector reveal the exact point where human suffering ends and mastery begins. You are not a helpless victim tossed about by the capricious winds of economic fortune. You are the projectionist of your own reality. How does one embody this profound truth in the immediate, tangible moments of today? When an unwanted circumstance flashes across the screen of your life, an overdue bill, an empty bank account, a sudden rejection practice, the art of the mental pivot. Close your eyes physically or mentally for 10 seconds. Visualize stepping away from the silver screen of your daily worries. Walk backward through the empty theater, open the heavy door of the projection booth, and look at the film spinning on the reel. Identify the old fear, the inherited belief, or the frantic thought that created this shadow. Then, with the calm authority of a master filmmaker, mentally cut that strip of film, discard it into the dark, and insert a new reel of absolute provision, peace, and divine order. Open your eyes knowing that the old shadow is already fading from the wall. By anchoring this practice in your daily rhythm, you cease to feed the monsters on the screen. You redirect your power from reactive exhaustion to creative sovereignty. The projector has been accessed. The frantic struggle against the waves has ceased. But a machine cannot run on intention alone. It requires the precise, daily fuel of conscious command. How do casual conversations and invisible idioms act as hidden sorcery, locking the human mind into generational loops of poverty? Step forward, traveler, and cross the threshold into Chapter 3, where we investigate the dangerous magic of the unintended sorcerer and learn how to silence the discordant record of the past once and for all. The hour is late, draped in the heavy, indigo velvet of midnight. The house is entirely still, save for the rhythmic, low-frequency hum of a refrigerator or the distant, mournful wail of a late-night train cutting across the valley. Imagine sitting alone in the dark room, the blue-white glare of a forgotten device extinguished, leaving only the amber glow of a single desk lamp. In this sacred, unshielded quiet, a voice begins to whisper. It does not come from outside the window or from the electronic speakers of the modern world. It arises from the subterranean corridors of the human mind. It is a familiar, low-pitched murmur that slips through the defenses of consciousness when the guard is down. I never have enough, the voice sighs, smooth as polished obsidian. Money goes out faster than it comes in. Prices are rising, luck is a stranger, and I am simply not one of those fortunate people for whom the world opens its treasures. To the casual listener, these thoughts feel like harmless observations, mere reflections of objective reality, or a tired person venting the frustrations of an exhausting week. They feel like a private monologue, a harmless internal complaint whispered in the privacy of one's own skull. Yet, hear this truth with absolute, unshakable gravity. These are not mere thoughts. They are legal documents. They are ironclad binding contracts drafted, signed, and notarized in the court of the subconscious mind. Every time those sentences roll off the tongue or echo in the chambers of thought, an invisible magic is cast. The human being walking through the world is entirely unaware that they have picked up an ancient, razor-sharp wand and turned it directly against their own heart. They are walking around as unintended sorcerers. Every casual complaint, every muttered lament about the cost of living, every self-deprecating joke about financial ruin acts as a spell of limitation. The universe, acting as an absolute, uncritical, and faithful servant, listens to the incantation, bows deeply in the dark, and whispers its cosmic compliance. As you wish. If you whisper that you are drowning, the waters rise to meet your chin. If you declare that you are locked out of abundance, the doors grow thicker and the iron bolts slide silently into place. The tragedy is not that a dark fate has been forced upon you from without. The tragedy is that you have spelled your own confinement using the very breath given to you for creation. To unravel how casual language mutates into a sentence of poverty, one must deconstruct the psychological and metaphysical mechanics of the subconscious mind. Why does human speech carry such staggering, literal, creative weight? Recursive question. Why does the psychological and biological apparatus of the mind treat a casual, venting statement with the same absolute obedience as a formal command? Answer. Because the subconscious mind, the vast, submerged continent of the human psyche, possesses no sense of humor, no irony, and no critical filter. It operates like a master organic computer or an ancient printing press that runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It does not know when you are joking with a friend over coffee, it does not know when you are using hyperbole to make a dramatic point, and it does not recognize sarcasm. It takes every spoken word, every repeated phrase, and every emotionalized sentence as a direct specification sheet sent to the manufacturing department of your life. Recursive question. How does this literal-minded obedience translate into generational patterns of scarcity? Answer. Through the inheritance of an invisible word of poverty, most human beings do not invent their own limitations, they inherit them as linguistic heirlooms. Well-meaning parents, struggling ancestors, and culturally conditioned environments pass down phrases like, "Money doesn't grow on trees, we have to pinch every penny," or "rich people are dishonest." These phrases act like stubborn weeds deeply rooted in the soil of a child's expanding consciousness. They are repeated so often that they transition from external opinions into foundational axioms of identity. When an adult walks through life carrying these inherited idioms, their vocabulary becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Every time they utter a complaint about financial scarcity, they are reinforcing the ancestral briars that choke the garden of their divine supply. To break this curse, one must understand that the human tongue is the rudder of reality. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that your word is your wand swishing through the invisible ethers, carving out paths of wealth or trenches of lack with terrifying precision. Most people are waving this wand backward, slicing their own ankles while wondering why they cannot move forward. To stop acting as an unintended sorcerer, an individual must institute a strict spiritual audit of their own speech. They must recognize that every careless sentence of lack is a leak in the dam of their prosperity. The subconscious cannot manifest a new economic dawn while the conscious mouth continues to swear allegiance to the night. The record spinning on the turntable of the mind must be smashed before a new harmonious symphony can fill the air. Consider the historical precedent of Master Thaddeus, a renowned scribe and illumination artist in 14th century Bruges, whose hand could render gold leaf upon vellum with breathtaking precision. Thaddeus was a master of words. He spent his entire existence carving sacred texts, royal decrees, and ecclesiastical charters into imperishable calfskin. Yet, despite his extraordinary skill, Thaddeus lived in a state of chronic, crushing poverty. His workshop was drafty, his cloak was threadbare, and his family subsisted on meager crusts of dry bread. Why? Because Thaddeus was a chronic, unconscious sorcerer of his own ruin. Every morning, as he sat down at his wooden trestle table, Thaddeus muttered a continuous stream of self-inflicted curses under his breath. My eyes are failing, he would grumble to the empty room. The guildmasters are thieves who pay a pittance. Work is scarce, the winter is long, and a poor man's labor is worth nothing in this cursed town. He spoke these words casually, viewing them as harmless venting against an unjust economic climate. One spring afternoon, a mysterious traveler, an elder scholar of the Hermetic arts from the Levant, commissioned Thaddeus to illuminate a rare manuscript of ancient wisdom. As the elder sat watching Thaddeus work, the scribe paused, rubbed his aching back, and let out his usual lament. "Ah, well, what can one expect? Money always slips through my fingers like water. I was born under a dark star. Poverty is the natural coat of a humble craftsman." The elder scholar gently laid his hand over Thaddeus's ink-stained fingers, stopping the pen mid-stroke. "Master scribe," the elder said softly, looking deep into the artisan's weary eyes. "You spend your life illuminating the words of kings and into the words of kings and prophets on vellum, knowing full well that a royal decree changes the destiny of nations. And yet, every day, you sit at this very table and decree your own perpetual ruin upon the invisible vellum of the cosmos." Thaddeus blinked, startled. "I am only speaking the truth of my condition," he protested. "Look around this room. The empty hearth does not lie." "The hearth is empty because your tongue has locked the door," the elder replied sternly. "The universe does not respond to your external conditions, it responds to your decrees. You are a sovereign scribe holding a golden pen, yet you spend your hours writing chains upon your own wrists. Lay down the old ink. Stop signing warrants for your own imprisonment." Stunned by the profound realization, Thaddeus sat in silence as the elder departed. That evening, the scribe took a sharp knife and scraped away a phrase he had carved into the wooden beam above his workbench, a phrase he had stared at for 20 years. "Hard labor is the lot of the poor." In its place, using his finest gold ink, he painted a new decree. "My work is an expression of divine abundance, and my supply is immediate, overflowing, and secure." At first, the old habits fought back. The familiar urge to complain hovered on his lips like a bitter taste. But every time the complaint rose, Thaddeus clamped his jaw shut and replaced it with an internal statement of sovereign authority. Within 3 months, the atmosphere of his workshop completely transformed. Patrons who had ignored him for years suddenly flooded his door, drawn not merely by his artistic skill, but by the magnetic, unshakable dignity of a man who had finally stopped cursing his own destiny. His word had become a wand of light, and the gold flowed freely into his storehouse. The Chronicle of Master Thaddeus reveals the inescapable reality of human speech. You cannot harvest a crop of gold while your mouth continues to sow the seeds of barrenness. The subconscious mind is always listening, always executing, and always manifesting the exact script you give it. How does one embody this truth today, in the very hour of reading these words? Take a blank piece of paper and draw a vertical line down the middle. On the left side, write down the 3 most common complaints or scarcity phrases you find yourself repeating on a weekly basis, e.g., "I can't afford that. Money is so hard to make. Things always go wrong for me." Look at these phrases not as innocent venting, but as active legal indictments you have signed against yourself. On the right side of the line, write the precise, sovereign opposite for each statement, e.g., "My supply is infinite and immediately available. Divine intelligence guides my financial exchange. Order and ease govern my affairs." Commit to catching yourself every time an old phrase forms on your tongue, halting mid-sentence, and replacing it with the new decree. By anchoring this discipline in your daily awareness, you strip the unintended sorcerer of his power. You cease leaking your vital energy into the phantom ether of complaint and begin building a fortress of focused, deliberate creation. Take a quiet moment to pause here. Reflect on the casual phrases of lack you have unconsciously permitted to rule your life. Which inherited word of poverty are you ready to cancel right now? Let your intention settle into the calm certainty of your mind. The magical wand has been reclaimed from the shadows of careless speech. The invisible chains forged by ancestral idioms are beginning to dissolve. But silencing the old vocabulary is only the clearing of the field. To accelerate this transformation, one must enter into an intentional, disciplined sanctuary of speech. Step forward, traveler, and cross the threshold into Chapter 4, where we initiate the powerful, transformative discipline of the 7-day word fast, learning how an intentional period of sacred silence can pool your spiritual energy and manifest an entirely new reality. The heavy, immediate quiet that fills a room when a person finally stops speaking about their ruin is akin to the sudden drop in air pressure before an electric storm breaks. Imagine waking up to a world where the voice is locked behind a velvet gate of restraint. For 48 hours, the mouth has uttered neither complaint nor lamentation. The coffee cools in the mug while the mind races to grasp for its usual comforting habit of self-pity, only to hit a brick wall of absolute silence. There is no one to call to recite the catalog of unpaid bills. There is no sympathetic ear to bend with tales of economic betrayal, systemic unfairness, or nocturnal panic. The room feels dense, pregnant with unspent energy. The air hums with a strange, magnetic vibration, as if the walls themselves are listening to see if the human tenant will break the covenant. To the conditioned ego, this silence feels unnatural, suffocating, and terrifying. The ego craves expression. It wants to bleed out its anxiety through verbal venting, believing that every spoken fear diminishes its weight. But in reality, every spoken fear only anchors the anchor deeper into the mud. When a person steps across the threshold of a word fast, the noise of their own despair dies away, leaving a profound, resonant vacuum. And it is precisely within this vacuum that true spiritual power begins to pool. Like water rushing into a dry cistern, the vital life force that was previously squandered through careless conversational leaks begins to accumulate in the quiet chambers of the soul. The heavy, exhausted fog that clouds the eyes starts to lift, replaced by a sharp, piercing clarity. The silence is no longer an emptiness, it is a sanctuary. It is the sacred incubator, where the new reality is quietly gestating, far away from the destructive winds of idle speech. To understand why a period of strict conversational fasting exerts such a profound transformation upon human destiny, one must deconstruct the physics of spiritual energy leakage. Why does the simple act of withholding complaints alter the trajectory of a life? Recursive question. Why does talking about a problem bleed the energy required to solve it? Answer. Because human speech is an electromagnetic and spiritual discharge. Every time an individual articulates a problem with emotional intensity, such as crying out, "I am drowning in debt," or "I cannot afford to live," they broadcast that vibrational signature into the quantum field of consciousness. More destructively, they create an internal feedback loop. The ear hears the complaint. The nervous system reacts to the spoken word by releasing stress hormones, and the subconscious mind records the statement as an active instruction. This constant verbal recycling exhausts the mental battery, leaving the individual with zero residual energy to focus on creative solutions. Recursive question. How does a 7-day fast of speech reverse this energetic hemorrhage? Answer. By forcing the life force inward. When the valve of careless speech is tightly shut, the pressure of creative energy rises within the psyche. Instead of scattering intentions across 1,000 casual complaints about prices, taxes, and personal inadequacy, the mind pools its entire voltage into a singular, laser-focused point. Florence Scovel Shinn understood this metaphysical law implicitly. She observed that most people defeat their own prayers by talking too much. They make a positive decree in the morning, and then spend the rest of the day undoing it by gossiping about their limitations with friends, coworkers, and family. They leak their power through 1,000 tiny conversational cracks in the hull of their consciousness. The 7-day word fast acts as an emergency sealant. By refusing to utter a single sentence of lack for 7 consecutive days, the individual builds an unbreachable energetic dike. The subconscious mind, starved of old negative commands, and flooded with the quiet peace of disciplined restraint, begins to clear its cache. The old, discordant record stops spinning on the turntable, and the inner atmosphere clears, preparing the soil for an entirely new harvest of divine supply. Consider the chronicle of Master Cassian, a merchant of silk and rare spices in ancient Antioch, whose ledgers were once the envy of the eastern trade routes. Through a devastating series of naval storms, dishonest partners, and sudden imperial tariffs, Cassian was stripped of his fleet, his warehouses, and his standing. He found himself residing in a windowless stone alcove above the public granary, burdened by crushing debts, and surrounded by creditors who banged on his wooden door from dawn until dusk. For months, Cassian lived in a frenzy of verbal exhaustion. He spent his days rushing through the bustling bazaars, buttonholing former associates, explaining his misfortunes, shouting at merchants who cut off his credit, and lamenting his ruined destiny to anyone willing to listen. Every evening, he returned to his stone alcove, hoarse, feverish, and utterly depleted, his debts growing heavier by the hour. One evening, a blind hermit known as Brother Barnabas, who lived in a cave outside the city walls, was brought to Cassian's room by a concerned neighbor. The hermit listened patiently while Cassian poured out a torrent of grievances, complaints, and desperate worries that lasted nearly an hour. When Cassian finally fell silent, gasping for breath, the blind hermit shook his head slowly. "Merchant," Barnabas whispered, his voice steady and calm. "You are like a man whose ship has sprung 50 leaks, yet instead of plugging the holes, you spend your remaining strength screaming at the ocean. Your tongue is the leak. You bleed your fortune into the wind with every breath you waste on lamentation. What would you have me do?" Cassian cried bitterly. "Shall I sing songs while my creditors tear down my door?" "I would have you seal your lips," Barnabas replied. "For 7 days and 7 nights you shall enter into the covenant of the great silence. You shall not utter a single word of complaint, a single justification of your poverty, or a single statement of lack. If you must speak for bread or water, let your words be few and strictly necessary. For the rest, let your mind remain wrapped in holy quiet." Cassian balked at first, calling it madness, but driven by absolute desperation, he agreed. On the first morning of the fast, when his chief creditor pounded on the door demanding payment, Cassian opened it, bowed his head respectfully, and remained entirely silent, gesturing calmly inside. Unnerved by the merchant's unshakable, wordless composure, the creditor muttered an excuse and walked away. On the third day, the frantic buzzing in Cassian's mind began to subside. The compulsive urge to explain his misery evaporated. By the 5th day, an extraordinary stillness settled over his entire being. The frantic, scattered energy of his aura condensed into a powerful, magnetic calm. He spent his silent hours sitting by his small window, visualizing his storehouses filled with rich silks and spices under divine grace. On the morning of the 8th day, as he stepped out into the marketplace, still wrapped in the deep poise of his silent discipline, a stranger approached him. It was a foreign caravan master who had searched Antioch for 3 weeks looking for a merchant of absolute integrity and steady nerve to manage a major overland syndicate. The caravan master had asked dozens of traders for a recommendation, and every single one had pointed to Cassian, noting with awe that the fallen merchant had stopped complaining and now walked through the city with the sovereign quiet of a prince. The contract offered that very morning restored Cassian's wealth tenfold. His silence had plugged the leaks, and the universe had rushed in to fill the vessel. The Chronicle of Master Cassian demonstrates the undeniable truth of the spiritual law. When you dam the river of idle complaint, the waters of abundance rise with irresistible force. The word fast is not a passive withdrawal, it is an active, aggressive reclamation of your sovereign power. How does one embody this truth today, in the very hour of reading these words? The 7-day word fast protocol. Commit to a strict, non-negotiable 7-day word fast regarding your finances and limitations. For the next week, do not utter a single sentence of lack. Eradicate phrases such as "I can't afford it," "I'm broke," or "things are so hard right now" from your vocabulary. If you cannot speak a word of absolute abundance, choose a holy silence. When faced with financial reminders or bills, and meet them with silent neutrality or internal blessing rather than verbal complaint. Let your energy pool within you. If you are willing to accept this 7-day challenge, mark your place in the comments below by leaving the simple declaration, Day 1. Let us walk this path of reclamation together as a unified community of sovereign creators. The speech is purified, the leaks are sealed, and the spiritual voltage is rising within the quiet chambers of the heart. But stopping the outward bleed of lack is only the second pillar. To transform an empty storehouse into an overflowing treasury, one must learn the ancient, misunderstood art of befriending the obstacle itself. Step forward, traveler, and cross the threshold into Chapter 5, where we explore the shocking alchemy of blessing the burden, learning how to transform your heaviest financial pressures into the golden bridge of your deliverance. The clock on the microwave glows in the dark with a harsh, neon blue hue, casting long, skeletal shadows across the kitchen counter. 3 a.m. Imagine sitting at that kitchen table in the dead of night, enveloped by a silence so heavy it presses against the eardrums like atmospheric water. Spread out before you is a collection of papers that feel less like mail and more like execution warrants. Final notices, past due utility bills, medical collections, and an empty leather wallet lying open like a discarded husk. The air smells faintly of stale coffee and cold linoleum. A tight, iron fist begins to squeeze from the inside of your chest, constricting the lungs, quickening the pulse, and sending sharp, electric spikes of panic down the spine. In this visceral hour of desperation, the universal instinct of humanity screams for war. The mind marshals its forces to resist, to push back, to curse the debt, to rage against the creditors, and to fight the terrifying apparition of poverty with every ounce of remaining strength. Every fiber of your being wants to look at those overdue bills and scream hatred at them. You want to tear them to pieces, to curse the system that allowed them to accumulate, and to treat them as mortal enemies that have come to destroy your life. But hear this truth with the deepest chambers of your soul. The pain you feel right now is not coming from the bills themselves. It is coming from the exhausting, futile war you are waging against them. Florence Scovel Shinn taught an ancient, paradoxical wisdom that shatters conventional survival tactics. Resist not evil. When a man fights a situation, he pumps his own vital life force directly into it. He gives it substance, reality, and weight. By treating lack as an enemy, he anchors it into his lived experience through the sheer, brute force of his opposition. Imagine taking every overdue notice, every final warning, every symbol of your deepest financial terror, and doing the unthinkable. Imagine lifting them from the table, softening your hardened heart, and choosing to bless them. To the logical, panicked mind, this sounds like sheer madness. How can one bless the very thing that threatens to crush them? How can a drowning sailor bless the anchor dragging him down into the trench? Yet, to bless a burden is the ultimate act of spiritual alchemy. It is a sudden realization that God's infinite supply and intelligence resides even within the appearance of lack, and that the burden is only wearing a temporary mask. When you bless your burden, it instantly loses its suffocating weight, the enemy transforms into a messenger, the wall crumbles into a bridge. To comprehend why blessing an obstacle dissolves it, while resisting an obstacle solidifies it, one must deconstruct the hidden metaphysical laws governing energy and opposition. Why does the human mind instinctively rush to fight its problems? And how does that very combat perpetuate the trap? Recursive question. Why does psychological resistance grant physical reality and momentum to negative circumstances? Answer, because in the economy of consciousness, attention is fuel. When an individual fights a circumstance, whether through anger, anxiety, resentment, or frantic worry, they are focusing 100% of their emotional and mental voltage upon the exact thing they do not want. Energy flows where attention goes. By obsessing over a debt as an evil enemy, the mind continually feeds that debt with vibrant, creative energy, causing it to loom larger and larger in the psychic landscape. The resistance acts as a glue, cementing the problem to the soul. Recursive question. How does the act of blessing the burden short-circuit this destructive psychological loop? Answer. By instantly shifting the vibrational frequency from contraction to expansion. To bless a thing is to acknowledge its transience, while stripping it of its power to terrify. When a person looks at a stack of bills and says, I bless you, and I thank the divine that your supply is already provided. They are executing a profound psychological judo move. They use the momentum of the problem itself to flip the polarity of their energy. Instead of pushing against the current, they surrender to the flow. Florence Scovel Shinn illustrated this through the profound metaphor of a river. Picture your life as a swift, majestic river carrying you toward an ocean of infinite supply. The natural state of this current is divine flow, ease, and provision. The rocks scattered across the riverbed representing debts, obstacles, and sudden losses are merely features of the landscape. If a traveler jumps into that river and spends all their energy swimming furiously upstream against the current, screaming at the rocks and trying to smash them with their bare hands, they will inevitably exhaust themselves and drown. They remain stuck in the exact same spot, bruised and battered by the very water meant to carry them home. The tightness in the chest, the knot in the stomach, and the terror at 3 a.m. are nothing more than the physical sensations of swimming against the current. It is the ego refusing to float. It is the desperate insistence that lack is a permanent, immovable wall rather than a temporary shadow. When an individual learns the art of blessing the burden, they stop fighting the river, they turn around, relax their muscles, and allow the current to lift them. The very rocks they were cursing become stepping stones. The debt ceases to be a monster and becomes a simple transactional reminder that an equal and opposite supply is already waiting in the invisible storehouse, eager to manifest under grace. Consider the historical precedent of Master Cornelius, a master glassblower in the trading port of Venice during the height of the Renaissance. Cornelius had spent decades perfecting the creation of iridescent, crystal goblets that adorned the banquet tables of doges and foreign princes. His furnaces burned day and night. His guild was respected. His coffers were full. Then came the year of the Great Frost. A bitter winter froze the canals solid for months, cutting off the transport of raw potash and fuel wood. At the same time, a malicious rival syndicate forged trade documents accusing Cornelius of smuggling, resulting in the immediate impounding of his workshops and the freezing of all his commercial accounts. Cornelius found himself locked out of his kilns, saddled with massive debts owed to his raw material suppliers, and facing imminent debtor's prison. For weeks, the proud glassblower raged against his fate. He spent his days pounding on the magistrate's locked doors, screaming curses at the guards, and writing furious, venomous letters to his creditors. Every night, he lay awake on a cot of straw in his unheated workshop, his chest burning with white-hot rage, his hands clenched into tight fists of bitter frustration. His debts grew heavier. His health deteriorated rapidly under the continuous cortisol storm of pure resistance. He was fighting the river with every breath, and the water was pulling him under. One evening, an old Franciscan friar named Brother Lucas, known throughout the quarter for his serene countenance amidst poverty, came to visit Cornelius. The friar found the glassblower pacing the floor like a caged beast, weeping over a final notice of seizure from the bank. "Look at them!" Cornelius shrieked, thrusting the parchment into the friar's face. "These papers are demons. They are vampires sucking my lifeblood. I curse the day I ever opened this furnace." Brother Lucas gently took the parchment from the trembling glassblower's hands. He did not recoil. Instead, he held the paper lightly between his palms, closed his eyes, and bowed his head in quiet reverence. "What are you doing?" Cornelius gasped in disbelief. "You are blessing my executioner?" "Cornelius," the friar whispered, opening his eyes and looking into the artisan's tormented soul. "You are screaming at a shadow. You have spent weeks feeding this debt with your rage, your hatred, and your fear. You have made this bill more powerful than God. You have built a prison out of your own resistance. The law of the Spirit is absolute. Resist not evil. When you fight a burden, you marry it. I command you tonight. Take these bills, hold them to your heart, and bless them as the channels through which your deliverance shall appear." Cornelius stared at the old friar as if he had lost his mind, but the exhaustion of his long battle had finally broken his pride. Trembling, the glassblower took the stack of overdue notices back into his hands. He closed his eyes, swallowed the bitter lump in his throat, and whispered a radical, halting phrase, "I bless you. I thank the divine that you are paid in the divine mind, and that my supply is already on its way under grace." As those words left his lips, something miraculous happened. The iron vise around his chest suddenly snapped open. A profound, cool wave of peace washed over his entire body. The frantic heat of his rage vanished, replaced by an absolute, unshakable stillness. He stopped fighting. He stopped pacing. He spent the next 3 days in quiet, prayerful reflection, cleaning his home and organizing his remaining tools, as if he were preparing a grand banquet. On the 4th morning, a foreign merchant from Constantinople, a man who had searched all over Europe for Cornelius's specific grade of iridescent crystal, walked unannounced into the open courtyard. Hearing of the glassblower's temporary misfortune, the merchant paid off Cornelius's entire debt on the spot in exchange for an exclusive contract to supply the Ottoman court. The burden had not been an enemy, it had been the precise bridge required to carry Cornelius to a level of wealth he had never before imagined. The chronicle of Master Cornelius and the timeless wisdom of Brother Lucas illuminate the exact pivot point where a financial crisis transforms into a spiritual triumph. You cannot conquer a mountain by screaming at its cliffs. You must find the pass, soften your grip, and allow the path to rise beneath your feet. How does one embody this truth today, in the very hour of reading these words? The practice of blessing the burden. Take the single bill, financial notice, or monetary obligation that currently causes you the deepest visceral dread. Hold that paper physically in your hands. Feel the texture of it, but instead of tightening your jaw or hardening your heart, intentionally soften your breath. Look down at the paper and speak aloud with quiet, sovereign authority, "I bless you. You are not my enemy. You are a temporary channel in a universe of infinite exchange. I thank the divine that the supply for this demand is already unlocked, and that my path is cleared under grace." Notice how the tightness in your chest dissolves the moment your resistance ceases. By anchoring this practice in your daily life, you stop leaking your emotional power into the illusion of lack. You step off the battlefield of perpetual struggle and take your place as the master of your vibration. Take a quiet moment to pause here. Feel the release that comes when you stop fighting your circumstances. Let your awareness settle into the deep, unshakable current of your own provision. The burden is blessed. The resistance has dissolved into peace. But recognizing the flow and blessing the obstacle are only preludes to the final, precise, architectural act of manifestation, placing the order with the cosmos. Step forward, traveler, and cross the threshold into Chapter 6, where we explore the exact mechanics of divine right activity and learn how to navigate the river of abundance without ever losing your way. The water moves with an ancient, terrifying indifference, rushing over smooth granite stones and foaming against the jagged banks of a deep mountain gorge. Imagine standing knee-deep in this rushing river as twilight descends, painting the canyon walls in bruised shades of violet and slate. The current is powerful, pulling relentlessly at your ankles, threatening to sweep you away into the dark unknown. The natural, panicked response of the untrained traveler is to lock the knees, clench the fists, tense every muscle in the body, and push upstream with all remaining might. You lean forward, shouting at the water, fighting the momentum, and driving your shoulders against an invisible wall of pressure. Yet, the harder you swim against the current, the faster your strength evaporates. The chest tightens with a burning agony, the breath turns into ragged, shallow gasps, the muscles turn to lead. Within minutes, exhaustion takes over, and the river begins to drag you under. This physical struggle in the cold mountain water is the exact mirror of the human financial journey. Most people spend their entire lives fighting the current of their own existence. They feel the tightness in their chest when they think about money, experiencing the panic of a zero balance or an overwhelming stack of debt as a personal assault by a hostile world. They believe that lack is a massive, permanent wall blocking their path, and that their only chance of survival is to wage a brutal, exhausting war against it. Step back from the imagery for a moment. Hear this profound truth echoing off the canyon walls. Lack is nothing more than an optical illusion. It is not a physical wall, nor is it a permanent state of being. It is merely a shadow cast by your own internal fear, born from the frantic, mistaken belief that you are separate from the stream of provision. When an individual stops swimming upstream when they turn around, relax their rigid muscles, and allow themselves to float, the very current they were fighting transforms. The water that felt like an enemy suddenly becomes the buoyant, loving force that carries them safely home. The tightness in the chest dissolves, replaced by an absolute, floating trust in the invisible design of the universe. To understand why the human mind clings so fiercely to struggle while rejecting the effortless flow of abundance, one must deconstruct the psychological mechanics of lack and the metaphysical law of divine right activity. Why does the human organism equate effort with worth? And how does that misconception lock people into a perpetual state of scarcity? Recursive question. Why does the psychological apparatus instinctively believe that a supply must be painfully hunted, cornered, and wrestled from a reluctant universe? Answer. Because civilization trains the individual to view survival as a zero-sum game of competition. From an early age, people are conditioned to believe that resources are finite, that there is only so much to go around, and that if someone else succeeds, someone else must starve. This scarcity mindset programs the subconscious to treat the universe as a hostile wasteland rather than an overflowing storehouse. Consequently, when an individual faces a financial shortfall, their nervous system triggers an aggressive fight-or-flight response. They feel that if they do not hustle, sweat, and fight every second, they will perish. Recursive question. How does the principle of divine right activity dismantle this illusion and re-engineer human destiny? Answer. By introducing the immutable law that there is always a supply precisely equal to every demand. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that if a person has a financial demand such as a bill for $100, that exact sum already exists simultaneously in the spiritual realm, waiting for the individual to claim it through aligned vibration. The demand and the supply are two sides of the same coin. They are created as a unified package. When an individual attempts to force the supply through raw, frantic hustle driven by fear, they introduce friction into the cosmic machinery. They jam the gears. But when they align with divine right activity, they recognize that their only task is to open the channel and allow the supply to flow naturally. To shift from a victim of circumstances to a master of vibration, one must dissolve the imaginary wall separating personal desire from universal supply. The moment an individual stops fighting the rocks in the river and surrenders to the current, they activate a higher law. The struggle ends, and the harvest begins. Consider the historical chronicle of Master Valerius, a hydraulic engineer and mapmaker in ancient Alexandria, who spent decades designing aqueducts and irrigation systems for the imperial provinces. Valerius was a man of immense intellect, accustomed to calculating every variable, measuring every angle, and controlling every flow of water through sheer force of mathematics and engineering. Yet, when a catastrophic drought struck the region, drying up the municipal springs and bankrupting the city's treasuries, Valerius found his grand systems utterly useless. His bank accounts were emptied to pay starving laborers. His grand estate was seized by creditors, and he found himself stranded in the desert oasis of Fayum, responsible for a desperate community of hundreds of families, with not a single coin left to his name. For 6 months, Valerius lived like a man possessed. He spent his days walking the dry riverbeds under the blistering sun, digging frantically into the parched earth with a broken shovel, cursing the heavens, and trying to force water out of stone through sheer physical exhaustion. Every evening, he returned to his tent bleeding, sunburnt, and weeping over his utter failure. He was fighting the desert. He was swimming against a dry riverbed, screaming at the rocks. One evening, an old nomadic tracker named Ishmael sat by Valerius's meager campfire, watching the engineer nurse his blistered hands. "Master engineer," Ishmael said quietly, handing him a cup of cool water. "You have spent your entire life building dams, channels, and locks to force water where you want it to go. But you do not know how to follow the water. There is no water." Valerius shouted, his voice cracking with despair. "The springs are dead. The earth is iron. Every calculation I make ends in zero. You calculate with the mind of a captive. Ishmael replied, pointing toward the southern horizon, where a flock of desert birds flew high in the dusk. You look at the dry ditch at your feet and call it the end of the world. But water does not vanish. Valerius. It only retreats to underground rivers. You are exhausting yourself digging in the hard rock of your own resistance. Stop fighting the drought. Surrender to the hidden current. Stunned by the nomad's words, Valerius dropped his shovel. That night, for the first time in months, he did not pace the tent. He lay down on the sand, closed his eyes, and let go of his frantic need to control the outcome. He released the anger, the pride, and the terror of poverty. He surrendered his engineering mind to the invisible intelligence of the cosmos, whispering into the quiet dark. I release the struggle. I open myself to the divine right supply that flows beneath this desert. The next morning, instead of digging randomly in the parched earth, Valerius walked silently, 3 miles downstream, guided by an intuitive pull he could not logically explain. He noticed a cluster of unusually vibrant green desert ferns growing out of a narrow fissure in the canyon rock. Recognizing the botanical sign of an underground fault line, he drove an iron spike into the stone with a single, effortless blow. With a deep, resonant sigh, the rock fractured, and a crystal-clear artesian spring burst forth into the sunlight, gushing with a force that instantly filled the dry basin. The desert had not been a wall, it had been a veil, hiding an underground reservoir. Valerius's surrender had unlocked an abundance that outlasted the drought entirely. The Chronicle of Master Valerius and the wisdom of the Desert Guide reveal the ultimate secret of liberation. When you cease fighting the dry riverbeds of your life, the underground springs of infinite supply rise up to meet you. The struggle was never about a lack of resources. It was always about the rigidity of the swimmer. How does one embody this truth today, in the very hour of reading these words? The practice of the surrendered float. Take a moment to examine where in your life you are currently swimming upstream, forcing a solution, worrying over a timeline, or fighting a circumstance with anxiety. Close your eyes, take a deep, grounding breath, and mentally release the oars. Visualize yourself turning around in the rushing water of your current situation and letting go. Whisper internally or aloud. I cease my struggle. I surrender my anxiety to the infinite intelligence of the universe, and I trust the divine right supply that is already flowing toward me under grace. Feel the physical sensation of the invisible current catching your weight and carrying you forward with effortless ease. By anchoring this practice in your daily life, you dissolve the wall between your personal desire and universal provision. You step out of the frantic hustle of the reactive ego and enter into the sovereign flow of spiritual law. Take a quiet moment to pause here, let go of the oars. Feel the effortless support of the universe holding you right now. The current has caught you, and the struggle is over. But dissolving the resistance and aligning with the flow are only the preparation for the ultimate act of manifestation. Placing your precise order into the cosmic kitchen. Step forward, traveler, and cross the threshold into Chapter 7, where we explore the exact mechanics of the cosmic kitchen of definite demand and learn how to shape your reality with absolute precision. The restaurant is vast, dimly lit by chandeliers of beaten brass and filled with the low hum of expectant diners. Imagine walking through the heavy velvet curtains into this celestial hall, stepping up to the counter, and encountering a server who stands waiting with pen poised over a pristine pad of paper. If you approach that server with a vague, timid mumble, if you shrug your shoulders and say, "I am hungry, I suppose. Just bring me something, anything that will keep me alive," you invite chaos into your experience. The server nods politely, turns to the kitchen, and minutes later delivers a plate of food you cannot digest, ingredients you despise, or a meal that leaves you empty and unsatisfied. Most human beings approach the universe in precisely this manner. They pray for general help. They murmur vague wishes into the ether, hoping things will somehow get better, wishing for more money without defining what more actually means, and casting loose, formless desires into the dark. Yet, the law of mind is rigorously precise. It operates with the unbending accuracy of a cosmic kitchen. Florence Scovel Shinn emphasized that the imaging faculty, the mind's capacity to hold a clear, unwavering picture of what it desires, is the master tool of manifestation. Most people use this magnificent faculty backward, imaging disaster, picturing their cars breaking down, their bosses firing them, or their bank accounts lingering in a state of chilling zero. They place orders for the very things they fear the most, and then stand back in horror when the kitchen delivers precisely what they asked for. If you were starting over from the ashes of a zero balance, you would stop wishing and start ordering. You would sit in the sacred silence and ask yourself, what is the exact sum required to live in dignity, beauty, and ease right now? Not a mountain of gold just to feed an ego, but the precise figure that represents my divine design for this moment. And then, with the sovereign authority of a master chef, you would place a definite demand. You would declare the exact amount, knowing that the infinite spirit is ready and waiting to fulfill the order under grace and in a perfect way. To understand why vague prayers fail while definite demands unlock the storehouses of the universe, one must deconstruct the psychological and metaphysical mechanics of the imaging faculty. Why does the human mind default to vague wishing, and how does structural precision alter the laws of manifestation? Recursive question. Why does the psychological apparatus resist making definite, specific demands when faced with financial lack? Answer. Because the ego operates out of a deep-seated sense of unworthiness and fear. When a person is drowning in debt or staring at a zero balance, the ego feels arrogant even asking for a specific amount. It whispers that asking for too much is greedy, or that asking for anything specific is dangerous because it invites disappointment. Consequently, the individual defaults to vague, formless prayers like, "Lord, help me through this month," or "I hope things get better." These vague prayers act as weak, unformatted data inputs that the subconscious mind cannot translate into a concrete blueprint. Recursive question. How does formulating a definite demand bypass this psychological barrier and compel the universal supply to materialize? Answer. By engaging the law of precision. The universe is a mirror of exactitude. It responds to clear blueprints, not wandering wishes. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that man is meant to decree a thing, and it shall be established unto him. When an individual identifies the exact financial sum required for their divine right activity and pairs that demand with the phrase, "under grace and in a perfect way," they align their personal will with universal law. The under grace clause is vital. It ensures that the supply arrives without struggle, without harming anyone else, and through unexpected channels of divine intelligence. Without a definite demand, a person is like a ship drifting on the ocean without a rudder, hoping the wind blows toward an island. With a definite demand, they become the captain who plots the exact coordinates, setting the sails to catch the exact trade winds designed to carry them into harbor. The demand creates the shape, and the supply rushes in to fill it. Consider the historical chronicle of Master Benedict, a master clockmaker and automata designer in a medieval European city, whose workshop was renowned for creating intricate, gear-driven mechanical wonders that kept time for cathedrals and royal courts. Benedict was a genius of precision. Every gear he cut was measured to the fraction of a millimeter. Yet, when a devastating fire destroyed his workshop and wiped out his guild contracts, Benedict found himself in his later years living in a cramped attic, stripped of his tools, owing massive debts to his metal suppliers, and staring at a ledger filled with zeros. For months, Benedict fell into the trap of vague wishing. Every morning, he would look out his attic window and sigh into the cold air. "O Lord, send me relief. Send me some work so I do not starve." Months passed, and nothing changed. His creditors closed in, his bread crusts grew moldy. His prayers were formless mist, evaporating into the cold attic air before they ever touched the sky. One afternoon, a traveling master builder from Florence, noticing the old clockmaker's plight, climbed the creaking stairs to the attic. He found Benedict sitting hunched over an empty wooden table, weeping quietly. "Master Clockmaker," the builder said, looking at the empty table, "you spend your entire life crafting gear trains where a single misaligned tooth destroys the entire mechanism. And yet, when you present your petition to the universe, you hand over a blank, smudged sheet of paper. Why do you expect the divine to build a clock when you have given no specifications? What specifications can a beggar give? Benedict groaned bitterly. I need money. I need everything. How can I name a sum when I am drowning in an ocean of debt? You cannot build a cathedral with a sigh, the builder replied, pulling a piece of clean parchment and a quill from his pouch. The universe is a master builder waiting for your blueprints. Stop praying for help. Sit down. Calculate the exact sum required to clear your debts, purchase your new tools, and sustain your divine work for 3 months. Name the figure. Make a definite demand. Stunned by the builder's words, Benedict took the quill. For the first time in a year, his hands stopped shaking. He calculated his debts, added the cost of a new lathe and brass stock, and arrived at a precise, uncompromised figure, 200 gold florins. He wrote that exact number at the top of the parchment, and beneath it, using the ancient formula of spiritual law, he added, Infinite Spirit, I make a definite demand for the sum of 200 gold florins, which is mine by divine right. It comes to me under grace and in a perfect way, through channels of infinite abundance. He folded the paper, placed it in his pocket, and stood up with the quiet posture of a master artisan. He stopped wishing. He stopped complaining. He spent the next 3 days cleaning his attic workspace, polishing an old brass gear he had salvaged from the fire, and preparing his workbench for the arrival of the tools. On the 4th morning, a messenger arrived at his door, bearing a commission from a foreign prince who had searched high and low for the legendary clockmaker, offering an upfront commission of precisely 200 gold florins for a custom astrolabe. The definite demand had drawn its exact supply out of the invisible ethers. The Chronicle of Master Benedict and the absolute precision of the cosmic kitchen reveal an immutable truth. You cannot harvest a specific crop if you refuse to plant a specific seed. Vague wishes produce vague nothingness. Definite demands command the universe into immediate action. How does one embody this truth today, in the very hour of reading these words? The practice of the definite demand. Take a clean index card or a piece of paper. Sit in quiet reflection for 3 minutes until your mind settles. Ask yourself, what is the exact financial sum required for my divine right activity right now? Do not make the number astronomical out of greed, nor make it microscopic out of fear. Find the exact, dignified figure that covers your immediate needs and steps. Write that figure down clearly at the top of the card. Beneath it, write the ancient decree, Infinite Spirit, I make a definite demand for the sum of insert amount, which is mine by divine right. It comes to me under grace and in a perfect way. Carry this card in your pocket like a ticket to a grand performance. Look at it not with desperation, but with the quiet, unshakable certainty of someone who has already placed an order at a royal banquet and is simply waiting for the server to arrive. By anchoring this practice in your daily life, you replace the chaotic static of worry with the sharp, clear frequency of a definite command. You step out of the crowd of wandering wishers and take your place among the architects of reality. Take a quiet moment to pause here. Feel the power of clarity washing over your mind. Let your definite demand settle into the quiet storehouse of the universe. The order has been placed with absolute precision. The blueprint is drawn. But a guest who orders a feast does not stand by the kitchen doors weeping in doubt. They sit at the table, unfold their napkin, and prepare for the meal. Step forward, traveler, and cross the threshold into Chapter 8, where we explore the psychology of complete certainty and learn how to carry the spiritual umbrella that commands the skies to open. The afternoon sky hangs heavy and bruised over the cobblestone streets, suffocated by the dense, purple-black clouds of an impending tempest. Imagine sitting inside a sunlit cafe or looking out a tall apartment window as the wind begins to whip the dust into swirling dervishes. Across the street stands a traveler who has just placed an order for a train ticket to a distant city. The departure is confirmed, the ticket is secured in his pocket, and yet, as he steps out onto the threshold, he opens a broad, sturdy umbrella and holds it firmly over his shoulder. The pedestrians scurrying past pause to look at him with a mixture of confusion and skepticism. There is not a single drop of rain falling from the sky at this exact second. The pavement is still bone dry. To the casual observer, carrying an umbrella when not a single drop of moisture has touched the earth feels like an absurdity, an act of theatrical delusion. Yet, this traveler embodies a profound metaphysical truth that separates the amateur from the master. He carries his umbrella because he knows that faith is not a passive wish whispered into an empty room. Faith is a prepared state. If you are praying for rain, but you walk out into the blistering sun without carrying your umbrella, your actions betray your words. You do not truly believe the sky will open. You are hoping, wishing, and crossing your fingers, but deep down inside, you are bracing for a drought. If you woke up tomorrow with a bank balance of absolute zero, how would you walk through the world if you truly believed your divine inheritance was already secured? Would you slouch through the corridors of daily life with your eyes fixed on the dirt, wearing the ragged clothes of defeat? Or would you carry your spiritual umbrella? Would you walk with your head held high, speaking with the resonant tone of a sovereign soul who knows that a massive, inexhaustible storehouse is waiting just beyond the horizon, even if the bank doors have not yet opened their locks? The how is never your business. The how belongs entirely to the infinite. Your only task is to prepare your house, polish your shoes, and step out into the storm with absolute, unshakable expectancy. To comprehend why true faith requires physical and psychological preparation, one must deconstruct the hidden mechanics of expectancy and the metaphysical law of correspondence. Why does the human mind struggle so intensely to act as if a prayer is already answered before tangible proof arrives? Recursive question. Why does the psychological apparatus demand physical, sensory proof before it allows itself to feel secure? And how does that demand lock the individual in an endless loop of lack? Answer. Because the ego mind operates entirely on a linear, sensory-bound timeline. Seeing is believing. The ego looks at the material world as the ultimate authority, treating whatever is physically present, such as an empty wallet or a stack of bills, as an immutable, permanent reality. When an individual waits for tangible proof before feeling abundant, they are trapped in a reactive loop. They give their power away to external effects, making it impossible for new causes to manifest. The universe responds not to what you want, but to what you prepare for. Recursive question. How does the act of carrying the spiritual umbrella, acting, dressing, and preparing as though the supply has already arrived break this sensory-bound prison? Answer. By sending an unmistakable, commanding signal to the subconscious mind and the quantum field of consciousness. When an individual prepares their life for a blessing, cleaning their storehouse, aligning their posture, and making physical space for the harvest, they bridge the gap between invisible faith and visible reality. Florence Scovel Shinn illustrated this brilliantly when she noted that faith without works, or preparation, is dead. If you place a definite demand for a new life, but you continue to live in total squalor, despair, and disarray, you are canceling your own order. The universal storehouse is governed by precise laws of resonance. When you carry your spiritual umbrella, you announce to the cosmos that you trust the law implicitly. You do not worry whether the delivery truck will crash or whether the company exists. After you click buy online, you go about your day and make space in your home for the package to arrive. You do not sit by the door weeping in doubt. You trust the delivery. And because your vibration is steady, calm, and prepared, the channels of infinite intelligence swing wide open to deliver your divine provision. Consider the historical chronicle of Master Roland, a master tapestry weaver in a northern European trading city whose looms had woven magnificent works of art for royal courts across the continent. Roland was a man of extraordinary skill, but through a disastrous trade embargo, and a dishonest partner who fled across the sea, Roland's guild was dissolved, his looms were seized, and he found himself living in a damp, freezing cottage with nothing left but a handful of wool scraps and a zero balance in his ledger. For months, Roland behaved like every other desperate soul struck by sudden poverty. He sat huddled over his empty wooden bench, shivering in the cold, weeping over the lost looms, and muttering prayers of frantic petition into the dark. "Lord, send me work," he would cry. "Send me a buyer before the landlord evicts me." Yet every morning he woke up expecting disaster. His workspace remained a chaotic mess of tangled threads, broken bobbins, and dust. His prayers were contradicted by the chaotic, defeated state of his environment. One afternoon, a traveling master artisan from the southern provinces, a man known for his serene mastery and immense wealth, visited Roland's bleak cottage. The visitor looked at the weeping weaver, then surveyed the dusty, cluttered room with its tangled, abandoned threads. "Roland," the master said softly, resting a hand on the weaver's trembling shoulder. "You pray for a royal commission, and yet your loom is choked with the debris of your despair. You ask the universe to send you fine silks, but you have left no clean space for them to rest. Where is your umbrella, Master Weaver? What umbrella can a beggar carry when the storm of ruin is already howling through his doors?" Roland sobbed. "The umbrella of preparation," the master replied firmly. "The universe does not pour gold into a trash heap. You must prepare your storehouse before the harvest can arrive. Clean this room, clear the tangled wool, oil the wooden shuttle as though a king's messenger were arriving tomorrow with a commission for your finest tapestries. Act like a man who expects abundance, not like a criminal awaiting execution." Stunned by the rebuke, Roland stood up. For the first time in a year, he picked up a broom and swept every corner of the cottage. He washed the small window panes until the afternoon light poured in clean and bright. He took his broken wooden shuttle, sanded it smooth, rubbed it with fragrant oil, and laid it neatly across the center of his workbench. He did not have a single coin in his pocket, but as he finished cleaning, he straightened his back, put on his finest remaining tunic, and walked out to his front porch with his head held high, breathing in the crisp air with the quiet posture of a master who knew his work was valued. He stopped worrying about the how. He surrendered the timeline. He simply held his spiritual umbrella high. The very next morning, before the sun had fully cleared the horizon, a royal courier knocked on Roland's door. The Queen's court had searched the entire province for a weaver of absolute mastery to restore the historic tapestries of the Grand Hall, and a visiting merchant had distinctly remembered Roland's peerless reputation. The commission offered that morning was enough to restore his estate tenfold. The umbrella had brought the rain. The Chronicle of Master Roland and the timeless wisdom of the prepared state reveal a foundational law of manifestation. You cannot receive what you refuse to prepare for. Faith is a posture, an attitude, and an active state of readiness. How does one embody this truth today, in the very hour of reading these words? The practice of the spiritual umbrella. Take a single area of your life where you have been praying for a breakthrough while simultaneously expecting failure, finances, career, or home. Choose one tangible action today that demonstrates absolute preparation for your answered prayer. If you are praying for financial stability, clean your wallet out completely, organize your remaining papers, and treat your modest funds with respect and gratitude. If you are waiting for a new beginning, clean a specific space in your home, desk, or workspace as if the arrival were guaranteed for tomorrow. When doubts whisper in your ear, mentally raise your spiritual umbrella and walk with the upright, dignified posture of someone whose inheritance is already secured in the cosmic storehouse. By anchoring this practice in your physical reality, you bridge the gap between invisible spiritual laws and visible material results. You stop waiting for permission from your circumstances and start commanding your reality through prepared expectancy. Take a quiet moment to pause here. Feel the shift in your posture as you open your spiritual umbrella. Let your awareness settle into the absolute certainty of your divine provision. The umbrella is raised, the storehouse is prepared, and the journey of reclamation is well underway. But even as the seeds of abundance take root in the dark earth, the human mind must understand the sacred necessary phase of transformation that happens beneath the surface where the old shell must crack before the magnificent oak tree can be born. Step forward, traveler, and cross the threshold into Chapter 9, where we explore the mystical biology of the cracking of the seed and learn how to trust the microsecond delay between the switch and the light. The soil is cold, dense, and absolute in its midnight embrace. Imagine being a seed buried deep beneath the heavy winter earth, enveloped in complete darkness and suffocating pressure. In this subterranean silence, a sudden, radical transformation begins. The hard, protective outer shell of the seed starts to split, cracking wide open under the strain of moisture and internal awakening. Everything the seed once knew, its rigid shape, its familiar safety, its hard-won identity as a self-contained kernel, is being systematically torn apart. If that seed possessed a human intellect and the capacity for worry, it would scream in terror. It would look at its fractured shell and think, "I am dying. This is the end. The pressure is crushing me, and everything I was is being destroyed." Yet, looking down from the vantage point of nature's timeless wisdom, we know an essential truth that the seed cannot yet see. The cracking of that hard shell is not a tragedy. It is the absolute prerequisite for the birth of the magnificent oak tree. When an individual stands in the thick of a financial or personal collapse, when the old life has crumbled and the zero balance feels like a cave-in, they are experiencing the exact agony of the seed. They feel as though they are perishing. They look at the dismantling of their old securities, their status, and their financial cushions, and they mistake the process of breakthrough for an execution. Listen closely to this profound truth. The discomfort, the disorientation, and the psychological tightness you feel right now are not signs of your failure. They are the unmistakable signs of your impending transformation. You are in the cracking phase. The old version of you, the one dependent on external validation, fragile paper currencies, and fear-based hustle, is being dismantled. You are not starting over from scratch. You are starting over from deep, hard-earned alignment. To understand why human consciousness experiences transformation as a form of dying, one must deconstruct the psychological mechanics of structural breakdown and the universal laws of transition. Why does the human psyche panic when its familiar containers collapse? Recursive question. Why does the psychological apparatus misinterpret the dismantling of an old lifestyle or financial status as an existential threat rather than a biological rebirth? Answer: because the ego identifies entirely with form. The ego believes that its safety is synonymous with its current container, whether that container is a bank account balance, a job title, a social status, or a predictable routine. When those external forms are stripped away, the ego experiences ego death. It panics because it does not know how to exist without its accustomed labels. It treats the structural collapse of a flawed foundation as the total destruction of the self. Recursive question. How does the universal law of the microsecond delay validate this discomfort and guarantee the emergence of a higher reality? Answer: by demonstrating that manifestation operates on precise divine laws of transition, much like electrical circuitry. Consider what happens when you flip a light switch in a pitch-black room. There is a microsecond gap where the electric current is rushing invisibly through the copper wires, but the tungsten filament in the bulb has not yet heated enough to glow. In that tiny fraction of a second gap, it looks to the human eye as though nothing has changed. The room remains dark. The switch has been thrown, but the effect is not yet visible. If a person lacks patience, they panic during that microsecond gap. They flip the switch off again, doubt the wiring, or tear open the walls to check for faults. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that you must never dig up your seeds in doubt to see if they are growing. When you have cleaned the slate, blessed the burden, and placed your definite demand, the inner machinery of the universe begins to execute your order. The invisible wiring of your consciousness is conducting the current. The delay is not a denial. It is the sacred gestation period. The light must come on. It is as absolute and mathematically certain as the law of gravity. Consider the historical precedent of Master Gideon, a master shipwright and naval architect in a bustling Hanseatic port whose slipways had launched magnificent merchant galleons across the northern seas for decades. Gideon was a legend of precision. His his ships were built to withstand the fiercest Atlantic gales. Yet, a sudden economic shift, combined with the rise of new shipbuilding syndicates and a devastating fire that consumed his primary timber yard, left Gideon utterly ruined. His centuries-old family business dissolved overnight, his yards were repossessed by creditors, his bank accounts were frozen, and he found himself at age 55 living in a drafty fisherman's shack, staring at a ledger filled with zeros. For months, Gideon suffered through the agonizing cracking phase. He walked the cold docks like a ghost, watching other men launch ships while his own hands were empty. He felt as though his life had been shattered beyond repair. Every night, he lay awake sweating with anxiety, cursing the fire, cursing the market, and feeling the crushing weight of total failure. He tried several times to scrape together scrap lumber to build a small fishing boat, but his hands shook so violently with despair that his tools slipped and his spirit faltered. He believed the cracking of his shell was the crushing of his soul. One stormy evening, an old master carpenter from a distant fjordside village, known for his serene wisdom, sought shelter in Gideon's drafty shack. He found the shipwright sitting hunched over an empty workbench, weeping into his calloused hands. "Master Shipwright," the elder said gently, shaking the rain from his wool cloak, "why do you weep over the splinters of your old hull when the forest is full of timber waiting for a greater design?" "My life is broken," Gideon groaned, his voice cracking with exhaustion. "Everything I built, everything I was, has been burned to ash. There is nothing left of me." "You speak like the seed that curses the dark earth," the elder replied, sitting down beside him. "You look at the destruction of your old enterprise and call it an execution, but you do not see what is happening beneath the soil. Your old form, the rigid, proud shipbuilder who relied only on oak and iron and his own reputation had to be broken so that a higher mastery could be born. You are in the cracking phase, Gideon. Do not dig up your seeds in doubt. The microsecond delay is not your enemy. It is the time it takes for the divine current to wire your new destiny." Stunned by the metaphor, Gideon fell silent. He stopped fighting the dark. He stopped trying to force his old life back together with rotting scraps of wood. He spent the next 40 days in absolute, disciplined stillness, resting his body, calming his mind, and sketching a radical new design for ocean vessels, modular, storm-resistant hulls inspired by the natural geometry of marine life. He didn't know where the timber would come from. He didn't know who would fund the slipway. He simply held the vision in his heart, trusting the invisible wiring of the universe. On the 41st day, a delegation of foreign traders, having heard rumors of Gideon's legendary genius and his unshakable poise during adversity, arrived at his shack with a royal commission to design an entirely new fleet of exploration vessels, providing unlimited capital and materials. The cracked shell had given birth to a master. The Chronicle of Master Gideon and the mystical biology of the seed reveal the ultimate truth of human evolution. You cannot give birth to the magnificent version of your future while clinging frantically to the decaying shell of your past. The breakdown is always the prelude to the breakthrough. How does one embody this truth today, in the very hour of reading these words? The practice of trusting the gap. When you experience a delay between your spiritual work and your physical manifestation, when the bills are still unpaid or the circumstances look dark, recognize that you are living in the microsecond delay. Do not panic, do not retract your definite demand, and do not dig up your seeds by reverting to doubt or complaint. Take a deep, grounding breath. Place your hand over your heart and speak quietly. I trust the soil. I honor the cracking of my old shell. The current is moving through the wires, and the light is already guaranteed under grace. Rest in the quiet certainty of the gestation period. By anchoring this practice in your daily life, you transform the anxiety of waiting into the sovereign peace of knowing. You stop sabotaging your own harvest with impatient doubt and allow the divine machinery to complete its work. Take a quiet moment to pause here. Breathe into the space of your transition. Trust the dark earth, for your harvest is already springing upward toward the light. The seed has cracked, the wiring is charged, and the light is drawing near. But theory must now culminate in a concrete, unyielding daily code of execution. Step forward, traveler, and cross the threshold into Chapter 10, where we complete our ascension through the portal of the zero balance and claim the eternal, unshakable storehouse that waits on the other side. The doorway stands open, framed by an amber luminescence that smells faintly of turned spring earth and ozone after a heavy rain. Imagine standing at this precise threshold. Behind you lies the narrow, dark corridor of past anxieties, ancestral poverty idioms, and the exhausting, frantic race of survival. Before you opens a vast, sunlit courtyard, stretching outward toward an endless horizon where the harvest is already white and ready for the sickle. At your feet rests the zero balance, the clean, empty slate that once felt like a chilling abyss. To the untrained eye, to the crowd of onlookers who still cower in the shadow of material illusions, a zero balance is a dark hole into which a man falls to his ruin. They clutch their tattered coats around them, terrified of the empty space, running frantically back toward the treadmill of endless hustle. Step forward and look through the eyes of the master. The zero in your bank account is not a hole. It is a portal. It is the gleaming, arched doorway through which a sovereign soul steps out of the matrix of lack and directly into the kingdom of divine supply. The walls of the old prison have dissolved. The frantic noise of the world has fallen away into a profound, golden stillness. You are not broken, you are not a failure, and you are certainly not starting over from a deficit. You are a divine being who has remembered how to wield the tools of the kingdom. You have reclaimed your wand, you have cleared the channel, and you have learned the sacred alchemy of the spirit. The money is not gone. It was never truly locked in an external vault. It is simply waiting for the version of you that knows how to call it home. And right now, in this very breath, you are that version of you. To synthesize the journey of reclamation into a permanent, unshakable code of sovereignty, one must deconstruct the final architecture of transformation. Why do so many spiritual seekers experience temporary breakthroughs only to slip back into the gravitational pull of old financial fears? Recursive question. Why does the human psyche subconsciously seek to return to familiar patterns of lack, even after discovering the laws of spiritual abundance? Answer. Because the human nervous system is chemically addicted to familiarity. Through decades of conditioning, the body has mapped scarcity as its baseline state. When a person steps into true abundance, the nervous system often registers that expansion as an unfamiliar threat, triggering an unconscious impulse to sabotage the new reality and crawl back into the predictable discomfort of the old cell. The ego prefers a miserable certainty over an expansive unknown. Recursive question. How does the integration of the three pillars, the word fast, the blessing of the burden, and the definite demand permanently sever this addiction to lack and anchor the soul in absolute sovereignty? Answer. By creating a new, unbreakable, internal operating system. When an individual adopts the word fast, they stop bleeding their creative voltage through careless complaints. When they learn to bless the burden, they strip fear of its emotional anchor, turning every obstacle into an elevator. When they make a definite demand, they provide the universe with a precise blueprint of manifestation. These three pillars do not merely alter bank balances, they reconstruct human identity. They shift the locus of control permanently from the shifting shadows of the material world to the unmovable center of spiritual law. The individual realizes that they are no longer an effect seeking a cause, they are the cause from which all effects flow. The portal of the zero balance closes behind them forever, leaving them standing in an unshakable, permanent storehouse of divine provision. Consider the historical chronicle of Master Aurelius, the imperial treasurer of a great Mediterranean realm who, during a sudden political coup, was stripped of his titles, his vast estates, and his gold reserves overnight. Thrown into a dank municipal dungeon with nothing but the clothes on his back, Aurelius faced the ultimate zero balance. For the first 3 days, Aurelius sat in the dark of his cell, wrestling with the ghost of his lost empire. But Aurelius was a student of the ancient mysteries. He remembered the teachings of the temple. The outer world is a shadow play, the kingdom is within. He closed his eyes, performed his word fast by refusing to utter a single complaint to his guards, blessed his imprisonment as a temporary crucible of purification, and made his definite demand to the infinite spirit for his divine right placement under grace. When the new magistrate summoned Aurelius to the tribunal a week later expecting to find a broken, trembling old man, he encountered something entirely different. Aurelius stood before the iron gates with the posture of a sovereign king. His eyes were clear, his breathing was calm, his voice resonated with absolute authority. He did not beg for mercy, nor did he lament his stolen gold. Stunned by his unshakable dignity, and realizing that no prison could break a man who was no longer bound by illusions, the magistrate dropped his charges on the spot, restored Aurelius's freedom, and appointed him as the supreme counselor of international trade for the entire empire. Aurelius walked out of the prison not merely regaining what he had lost, but stepping through the portal into an authority so absolute that no economic shift or political betrayal could ever touch it again. The Chronicle of Master Aurelius and the Portal of the Zero Balance bring this profound journey to its ultimate, triumphant realization. You are the master of your vibration, the sovereign of your speech, and the architect of your reality. How do we seal this truth into our daily existence right now? The final decree of reclamation. Take a deep, final breath, feeling the complete weight of the old law of lack falling away from your shoulders. If you accept this as done, if you feel the sovereign power surging through your restored channels, leave your final declaration in the comments below. My supply is here. Let these words be the cornerstone of your new reality. Walk in peace, walk in power, and remember that your word is your wand, use it well. The harvest is already white. The sickle is in your hand. Step through the portal. Claim your infinite storehouse, and let the magnificent symphony of your new life begin.